G'day. Yesterday, Prime Minister Julia Gillard, the Australian Prime Minister, for anyone who's watching this who doesn't live in Australia, announced that the Australian troops who are serving in Afghanistan will be gradually withdrawing over the next 12 to 18 months. So basically, they'll all be out mid 2013. Initially, they were meant to stay there 2014, um, which is when Obama said he's going to pull out the troops. But we have an election next year, and I guess our Prime Minister is doing very poorly in the polls at the moment. So, not that she's using our troops as a political advantage in some way. I don't know, she might be. I don't know what's going on inside her head. But coincidentally, we're having an election, so she probably wants a bump in the polls. Most Australians aren't too keen on the war in Afghanistan. 70% of Australians don't want us to be there. It could even be more than that, but last time I checked, it was 70%. So she wants to get a bump in the polls by getting Australia out. 32 Australians have died in Afghanistan. 219 have been wounded, and the troops are serving in Aussies province, 1,550 of them. In my honest opinion, I think the whole war has been a waste, and the only reason that we went there was because our politicians on both sides of the aisle have always sucked up to America and just basically have done whatever they have ordered. They don't order us per se, but especially at the time of 9/11, when you had two conservative politicians, George Bush and John Howard. When you've got those two people in power, Australia is always going to go to war. But when you've got two conservatives, we're definitely fucking going, basically. Now, the same thing happened in Vietnam. Australia had nothing to do with what was going on over there with the commies, North and South and all that sort of shit. No one in Australia wanted it to happen back then. But of course, our Prime Minister at the time kissed LBJ's ass like John Howard kissed George Bush's ass. Hence, we have Australian soldiers who have been killed for no good reason other than we needed to suck up to the Americans, because God forbid if there's ever a World War III, we need the Americans on our side, which is just a ridiculous argument. It's not like the Americans are going to be our enemy in World War III, if there even is a World War III, or if our mainland is ever threatened. The Americans will always stick up for us because we've been on the same side in World War One and World War Two. Now, I think that 32 Australians that have died in vain for many reasons. I'll try to keep it brief. I don't want to bore the fuck out of you. But mainly because the Taliban are not going to be defeated. They were kicked out of Kabul shortly after 9/11 in October 2001. No problems. They got, Kabul's the capital of Afghanistan, and they got smashed. The problem with guerrilla warfare, when you're on someone else's land, it doesn't matter how sophisticated your weapons are. It doesn't matter. America's the greatest military force the world has ever known, and in 10 years, the longest American war in history, they haven't been able to beat these ragtag bunch of unorganized villages. Why is that? Because in that sort of tough terrain, it's freezing at night, it's boiling hot in the day. These Afghans, the Taliban, They're hard bastards. Most of them, the older ones, have been fighting. They were fighting the Russians. They're all battle hardened. They're not going to give up. They're fanatics. When you're dealing with fanaticism, unless you kill every single one of them, including the women and children, the idea of a holy war, the jihad, is going to live on. So there's a litany of reasons why the Taliban won't give up and why the Americans have not been able to defeat them. But the main point is that when we withdraw from Afghanistan mid-2013, we're leaving behind the Afghan army, who have been trained by us and the Americans. Now, we're training the Afghan army in Oruzgan province. My guess is that if the greatest military force in the history of the world, together with the coalition of the willing, as Bush said, Britain, France, the Dutch, Australians, haven't been able to defeat these people, there is no way in the world the Afghan army, who are inexperienced, their heart's not in it, they're disorganised, they're under-equipped, they won't have the money or the support that they have at the moment as far as the fighting force is concerned. How are they going to be able to defeat the Taliban? Especially when the majority of the Taliban leadership is situated in Pakistan. They're just going to creep back in eventually. The whole Afghan government, Hamid Karzai's government, who he actually is calling Hamid Karzai the scumbag, the corrupt scumbag, is actually calling the Taliban his brothers at the moment. He's going to get his head fucking cut off as soon as America leaves. Unless America stays there indefinitely in great numbers, the Afghan army is fucked. Now, the other issue that I want to touch on is the justifications for us being there in the first place. I already said that we're only there because we do whatever America tells us to do, regardless of what the Australian people think about it. But our current Prime Minister and ex-Prime Minister, John Howard and Julia Gillard, have both said that it's in Australia's national interest to